Hey guys, here's a review for Here I Am, Jonathan Safran Foer's new book, which is, at its surface level, the story of a family and each character's identity, both within that family and individually, in relationship to one another and on their own, how they relate with one another, or don't. That family is the Block family. From oldest to youngest, there's Isaac, the great-grandfather figure. He's left to his own devices by his family. He's their patriarch, but his, will to live or life goals and needs relies on anticipating their achievements, while they kind of slowly let go of him, have a hard time seeing past his surface level of the needy old man that's becoming more and more unable to take care of himself, and we don't see much of him. Then there's Irv and Deborah, playing the grandparents within this family. Irv is more specifically focused on as the most outspoken and possibly problematic person in the family, a negative influence on his grandchildren, maybe. He runs a blog wherein he puts all of his thoughts on everything. He's a die-hard, say-all and leave-out-nothing kind of guy, especially in relation to his heritage. He's professional at being Jewish and showing support to Israel above all else. He and Deborah are parents to Jacob, arguably our main character within the family. We see from him and his wife Julia more so than any others. Jacob is a sort of backseat writer. He won a National Jewish Book Award when he was younger and now writes for an unnamed, undescribed TV show. His passion in writing, though, is another TV show about his family that he's been working on for a long time. He's got this little book that he calls the Bible on his TV show. This is a more fully fleshed out work than the actual show itself is, wherein he describes how to play each character and how to express every emotion that'd need expressing on the show. Basically, it's like a handbook for the eventual actors who will be in this hypothetical TV show. It's very important to Jacob that they get all of the little nuances right. Julia, his wife, is an architect that spends much of her time imagining her dream house, which sometimes does not include her husband or her family. She's adamant about giving their oldest son, Sam, the perfect bar mitzvah. She's self-assuredly, knowingly a good mom, but she struggles with the need to get away from her family and whether or not her life is actually what she wants it to be. Sam, the aforementioned oldest son, is infatuated with an online life simulation. It's not a game, he and other people who are into it will tell you, called Other Life. In Other Life, his avatar is a Latina girl named Samantha, and she's in the process of building her own synagogue, with which Sam is not happy. He's an overly observant, kid-going-on teenager with a tap into the goings-on of his family, his parents' relationship especially, deeper than any of them really want to realize. Max, the middle brother, a little younger than Sam, is a thinker. Along with his other two brothers, he's way too intelligent and thoughtful than he would be at that age, and he's got a love for the family dog Argus that none of the others can really shake a stick at. They take care of the dog, yes, Julia more so than the others, Jacob less than he'd like to think he does, but Max really feels for Argus specifically, and obviously looks up to his older brother Sam, or at the very least shows an immense understanding of Sam and his many frustrations. Then there's the youngest son, Benji, who's got a keen eye for saying exactly what nobody wants him to say in any given situation. He's observant in a different way to his older brothers. In fact, he's almost so unobservant and naive that he brings up things and says things that no one without a more mature sense of tact would say. But naive and young he is. Give it a few years, though. If his brothers are any indication, he'll be another witty existentialist in no time. There's also Jacob's cousin, Tamir, and Tamir's son, Barak, who've come to visit from Israel. Barak isn't spoken of much, other than to say that he's everything Jacob's sons aren't, but Tamir is a sort of brother to Jacob, the antithesis of him, at least on the surface and in their conversation. Jacob, at times, hates the way his cousin speaks and acts, while also wanting to emulate and be just like him. So that's the family. We follow them in their many conflicts and moments wherein they sort of bounce their personalities and wants and needs and thoughts and feelings and opinions off of one another. The story begins as Sam prepares for his inevitable bar mitzvah. Jacob and Julia are called to his Hebrew school to meet with one of the rabbis, as it seems that Sam's in trouble for making this list of profanities. On top of that, Jacob and Julia's marriage has had a sort of slow build-up of this ever-growing disconnect with one another. Julia discovers a secret phone of Jacob's that alludes to a possible affair that Jacob might be having. Then we're introduced to this much larger issue of a natural disaster that's hit Israel, which ends up wreaking havoc there and within the surrounding countries, both environmentally and politically. And then all of these things play into how this family sees itself. It's a story of a sort of gray area in identity and goes differently for each and every character. I think actually the groundwork for how everything else in this book goes can be found in how each character relates to this issue with Sam, his bar mitzvah, whether it'll actually happen now due to this conflict at Hebrew school, and whether or not he wrote this somewhat ambiguous list of profanities. Julia's mindset is that Sam must apologize and the bar mitzvah must go on as planned. Jacob's mindset is that they should believe Sam above all else when he says that he didn't do it, and that the bar mitzvah should go on as planned. Irv believes it doesn't matter either way, whether Sam wrote the list or not, and that the bar mitzvah should just happen anyway, because who cares if he did it. Isaac, it's hinted at, is just waiting for the bar mitzvah of his oldest great-grandson to happen so that he can just die already. Sam doesn't even want to have a bar mitzvah in the first place. Max and Benji just want everyone to want what everyone else wants, all at the same time without much bias towards any party, though they're loyal to their brother and are a good distraction in Sam's eyes for their parents. Sam appreciates that he's not always the center of attention like this, thanks to his younger brothers, because it'd likely kill him. These are all roles that these characters frequently play in different capacities throughout the book. When it comes to Jacob and Julia's marriage, a sort of milestone in that being the discovery of that phone of Jacob's that Julia found, there's so much disconnect in how each character views what's happened and what might happen. There's a lingering question of divorce, and to both Jacob and Julia, it's difficult to say whether this is more someone else's fault than their own. Both feel the fault themselves and put the fault onto each other. But it's a gray area, like the gray area in identity I mentioned a moment ago, because it's just sort of happened. Jacob's insistent that this phone thing isn't even really an affair because it was always only just words sent through text, and Julia's unsure whether or not she cares that's all it was. Actually, a part of her wishes that there was no ambiguity because it's not a clean cut in half sort of thing. Part of her wishes to be on her own, just to be on her own from now on, and a lot of her anger at the situation seems to come from not the fact that Jacob did this, but that he didn't do it well enough. And then Jacob's whole sense of self and how we as the reader come to view him is wrapped up in and informed by how others view him. He's never yelled at Julia or the kids, so that makes him a great husband and father, right? But the truth is, he's, to Julia, it seems, not enough of anything. And this is where we see Jacob and Julia's relationship throughout the book, as a sort of, this isn't quite enough, but it's what we have kind of thing. Neither of them is fully there in this marriage, but neither of them wants to come out and say that, to question it. It's what it is, it's what it's come to be, and that's what's really brought them to this point. Not only to this phone being found and the subsequent and pre-existing ever slowly burning decay in their relationship, but to this issue with Sam's bar mitzvah. Do they believe him or do they not? How do they come together on that? Can they find it within themselves to actually listen to what he wants and what the possibilities of him both writing and not writing that list could mean for what he wants? Because all of these things, these conflicts within their marriage that have kind of come to a climax now as we enter into this story of their lives has really determined the identities of their sons and how they relate to one another. And then on top of that is their relationship to their heritage, to being a Jewish family, to Israel, to how Jews are seen in the world and in this country, to how they see themselves. There's a lot of this that I really enjoyed. The exploration of each and every one of these characters within this family and what they represent to each other and to themselves, and to Jonathan Safran Foer even. I felt a distinct interference on the part of the author into each of these characters, as if each of them represents a certain bit of him and his experience. I really enjoyed most of Jonathan Safran Foer's writing style in this, the conversations especially, the dialogue, all flew by in a burst of excitement and energy. Each and every person written in this had something to say in some way, and each did their very best at letting their voice be heard. But those back and forth or even straight monologues really flew by and invigorated me as a reader. More often than not, the things said were profound and witty, intelligent and funny, depressing and illuminating. A drawback to all of that, something I tend not to enjoy most of the time, is that each and every character has something profound, witty, and intelligent and funny to say about everything. Sure, the vast majority of people in general in life have their moments, but all at once, all the time, no matter the circumstance or the age of the character, I think the character that I had the biggest problem with was Max. He's like 10 or 11, and he speaks like a freshman philosophy major. Sam, who's 12, speaks like a senior philosophy major, which bothered me just slightly less for some reason. But I'd rather not belittle that aspect of the writing, which I did for the most part enjoy, at least not too much, because I think their ages weren't exactly the point. I think a lot of the time I actually forgot how old they were and just enjoyed what they had to say, regardless of how unrealistic it was. Or maybe I'm just basing my knowledge on that age range on my own experiences. I don't know. Either way, the only thing that really bothered me in the writing itself, above all else, was the somewhat cheap, albeit sort of necessary at times, use of vulgarity felt at times present for just a little touch of shock value, and kind of found my eyes rolling over at times at its consistent repetition. This novel, like its characters, is inherently flawed in many ways, though. To dig so deep into identity and family and relationships and connections spanning several generations and heritages and countries, it's intrinsically necessary for there to be flaws in the way a cultural or political phenomenon is portrayed, to how individual members of those cultures are portrayed and represented. When you move so much and so seamlessly and relentlessly between the gray areas in personal identity and political happenings, so possibly apparently closely related to personal identity, there's bound to be a discord there. A discord that's reflected within the most personal relationships that this story offers, a marriage and a family. That's to say that Jonathan Safran Foer, I think, has a hard time balancing what he wants us to focus on and what he himself wants to focus on. I feel like there was a lot he wanted to say and to infer to us with the issues that Israel is dealing with in this book. It's hard to say whether or not he ultimately didn't give enough attention to it, or whether he was using it as a way to offset the more straightforward family drama, or whether he presented it exactly the way he meant to, possibly as just a sort of add-on to that sense of identity we come to explore in the rest of the book. Jonathan Safran Foer nips in the bud that sort of magical realism feel that's present in his early work, and I think that was a good call. I don't want to say that this book feels older or more grown up than his other work necessarily, just that it feels like we're on the other side of something, the other side of the author's own search for himself, the other side of a marriage gone wrong like Jacob and Julia's, the other side of 10 years between two major works by this author, the other side of 10 years worth of world events. Whatever it is, we're experiencing a new chapter in this author's life, it seems, one that this book and its characters just embody wholly and completely. It's the author's anger and frustration and love and contemplation and needs and wants and fears and indecision, among other things. It's not at all subtle, especially as it goes further and further along, and it's not really ever solved. I never got a sense of resolution about much of anything, besides maybe finally getting to hear each and every important character have his or her full say. Two of the earliest novels that I read and reviewed for this channel were Everything is Illuminated and Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. I enjoyed the former quite a bit, but not so much with the latter. I read them back to back, and I think that this book is more flawed than the other two, and that it has more in it to be flawed. It's just got more in it in general, obviously from its page count, and even more so in its content. This is called Here I Am, a reference to, in the Bible, Abraham's response to both God and to his son Isaac when called upon. It seems both God and Isaac want different things from Abraham, but Abraham answers them both the same. I'm not sure that any character in this book knows exactly how to navigate that kind of opposing inner conflict. In this book, at many points, all the characters must make decisions to do things for their family members, for their heritage, or for themselves. But what they do in each of these situations is telling about them, but not necessarily as defining or concrete as it is for Abraham. We can infer what kind of man Abraham is from saying unwaveringly, "Here I am," but it's an ongoing dilemma for many of the characters, Jacob and Julia especially, where they are on any given issue in relation to any given situation, and whether or not it's as clear-cut as saying, "Here I am." At so many points, it's that gray area, and that's where they're so often stuck. I did like this, and I'd recommend you give it a shot. I can imagine the enjoyment levels would vary heavily from person to person, but I've tried to give you a sort of overview wide enough for you to determine if it's something that you'd enjoy or something that you should pick up. I received this for review from the publisher, and I thank them very much for that. I really appreciate it. If you've ever read anything by Jonathan Safran Foer, or if you've read this especially, I'd love to hear what your thoughts on him and on this book are. I really appreciate you watching. Thank you so much, and I will see you later with more.